Taylor is joining us today. Thanks, Taylor, for being here. We, as you all will recall, had a lot of considerations that we were talking through on Tuesday. And so, Taylor, I know I didn't send those till yesterday, but we can kind of walk through those together. We're just kind of starting to think through. I know you met with some students on drafting some interview questions, but it's feeling like there are a few more considerations outside of just the interview questions themselves that we had some questions on and wanted to brainstorm. I wonder if bringing up the document is helpful. I'd like to, I'll put it in the chat, and so if you want to open it, if you all want to open it yourselves, you can, but maybe I won't screen share just so that we can see one another while we're having the conversation. Okay, so, you know, we're kind of moving into a place now where we're ready to think through some of the logistics of planning these key informant interviews. So the way that we had kind of been thinking about it is that we will conduct a set of interviews with folks who are currently experiencing homelessness or are recently housed, and then another set of interviews with some of the community organizations that work with people experiencing homelessness. And so, you know, ultimately, I think we'll have two different but related sets of questions. But it's some of the logistics, I think, more in a couple things. On the side of community organizations, thinking about prioritizing them. You know, you sent this incredible document of all of the different players in the space, but trying to decide who and how do we prioritize who we reach out to. And then on the side of folks who are experiencing homelessness, thinking through some of those logistics. So let's start maybe and talk about the community organizations and partners. I think the first question is, how do we decide on the list? And maybe we start with a larger list and assume that not everybody is going to, you know, respond and take us up on that offer. But Taylor, what are your thoughts on which organizations we should connect with to do some of these key informant interviews?
Can you hear me okay? Okay. Yeah. As far as like key informant interviews with the agencies themselves, or okay. I think it's really important to get the perspective of as many agencies as possible, just because of the different approaches and philosophies that different organizations use. So I would definitely suggest Fort Collins Rescue Mission and Catholic Charities. I think those two are gonna be the most important as far as like Fort Collins goes. Just because they have the most interactions with this population, I think. If it's not Homeward Alliance, it's Rescue Mission or Catholic Charities in a day. And I would loop Outreach Fort Collins into that group too. Anonymous Pumpkin. So trying to think who else would be good. You know, since we are focusing on health, I think it would be important to talk to somebody who's maybe more removed from working with this population on a daily basis besides providing healthcare. So an ER nurse or would be like ideal in my head to get that perspective. Or somebody from Salud or FMC, I think would be good too, just because they are the only Medicaid providing clinics in the area. but I think like Rescue Mission, Catholic, and Outreach are going to have that historical perspective of the issues of health in this community, especially because they're the ones that get dumped essentially on by the hospitals in our area. So receiving people in scrubs, receiving people post-surgery. I mean, I think everybody on this screen it doesn't have like an actual health medical background. So imagine if somebody was to just show up at your home and they are recovering from surgery. How would you handle that? That's the same thing that they do to the shelters. And that happens on a daily basis of like just expecting shelters to, I don't know, take care of people when they have a lot of high medical needs. So that I think that perspective is important.
Anybody have other specific agencies that you were thinking about that you wondered whether they would be relevant or important?
I was wondering about like the business community, specifically thinking about those who do or do not use Outreach Fort Collins. Like if we could get someone like a business owner who's more likely to call Outreach versus those that are like, I'm just going to call the cops. Like, I don't know if there's a way to get the other side of like, I'm just going to call the cops, but.
Yes. So there's the North College Business Association. They recently put out a survey asking other businesses what their interactions are like with people experiencing homelessness. This is me speaking very kindly about the survey. So I think there would be a lot of opportunity there for sure for people on like the north end of town where all the services are, and especially like there's a auto parts something right next to the Murphy Center, and I know that we've had plenty of issues with them in the past, so that might be a good informant. And then even Downtown Business Association, they I think are more intertwined with Outreach, so that could be the more Outreach Fort Collins specific group that would contact them, and then the North College Business Association might be more of your police callers. That makes sense.
I guess I'll just ask my question instead of writing it. Hearing what Hannah said, that also brought up this idea for me of, do we even want to include these perspectives in this report? I 100% agree that it would provide a stronger view of how our community interacts with individuals experiencing homelessness, but does it take away from any of our objectives within this project? And so I would also add, Hannah, if we would want to include business individuals, to also include law enforcement.
And one of the things I think, sort of tangentially related to your question, Javier, and back to our notion of scope, is if we are focused on health, who are the organizations that are going to, that, kind of to Taylor's point, that have the most relevant perspective when it comes to health? And how do we ensure that we don't diverge too far from that, so that we can make sure that we're getting the most robust information that we can get? Taylor, do you think, I know you mentioned, Bernie, Birnbaum,
Mhm.
right, as a
Mhm.
possibility. Do you think he would be a good person for a key informant interview?
Yeah, absolutely. He is a doc at FMC. He's Board of Health director, and he's been working with this population for a decade. So I think he would be a really good person to talk with. The other thing, gosh, just thinking, we have the Street Dog Coalition that comes to the Murphy Center twice a month, and they've started I think they're calling themselves the Health Collaborative or something. But anyways, there's two students, two med students that are at CSU right now, and they're actually doing like health clinics at the Murphy Center under the oversight of a doc from UC Health. And they're pretty new to offering services like this, health services. So they could offer a good perspective too. They might be some good people to talk to as they're starting this journey and just to understand what they're seeing as new eyes. But yeah, I think you make a good point that I would love to talk to the businesses. I would love to talk to police. But as far as like scope and purpose, I think it would be good to prioritize Rescue Mission Catholic outreach and like Bernie and other actual medical providers if we can get a hold of a ER nurse. I actually know the nurse manager, Amanda Miller at PVH, would probably be good to talk to, and I'm sure she'd be open to it, or even the social work department at PVH.
Did you say that group is called the Street Dog Coalition?
Yes.
I hear, okay, I just want to make sure I.
Yeah. Yes. It started, it's a Dr. Geller from CSU Vet school. He started offering free vet care to folks. And then it's just expanded since then. And we've brought in these med students to offer a sort of like medical clinic in conjunction with the pet clinic. So, because they realize that a lot of people will put their pets first above their own health. And so they said, well, let's just do both. So yeah, it's a cool model. It's definitely like that One Health model.
Mhm. Do you think Dr. Geller, would
Oh.
be a helpful voice?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know he'd be willing.
Okay.
I think we originally talked about like 8 to 10 key informants as far as like organizations go, right? Is that still the scope for this group? Is that doable? Is that too many?
I definitely think that's doable. And I think we could even expand, I think, let's say so we've kind of been thinking about kind of splitting off into students who are interested in conducting interviews with folks who are experiencing homelessness, students who are interested in the other organizations. And so, let's say there were 4 students, I think each of us could expect to do 2 or 3. So I think in that realm, even if there are a few additional, I think I won't speak on behalf of everybody, but my perception would be if there are a few more that feel really important and we're above that 10 to 12 number, we would make that happen.
Okay.
So that we can make sure that we're getting the most robust data set.
Okay. Yeah, I think if it were me and I was doing this, I would do Rescue Mission, Catholic Charities, outreach. I would try my dang hardest to talk to Amanda Miller. I know that she's busy, but I think that's an important perspective. Dr. Birnbaum, I would try to find somebody from Salud. probably like a case manager from Salute, I think would be the best. And then Dr. Geller from Street Dog Coalition. So that's like 7 people or so. And I do know that there's still, we talked about somebody from Homeward Alliance as well. And so I think that we could easily bring in a staff member from Homeward Alliance too. That's not me.
Okay. One other question I had is, how about anybody at Summit Stone or any of the players who are supporting mental health?
Yes, that's a good one too. Probably the best would be Alicia Mylar with Summit Stone. She is on their PATH team, and she's been there the longest. So she'd be good.
Perfect.
So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Mm-hmm. And then potentially, if in addition to Dr. Geller, we wanted to talk to the 2 students who were
Right.
part of that Street Dog Coalition, or if there was someone also at Family Medicine Center. So I think regardless, even in our longest list, we're still in that realm of 12 or so total.
Okay. Yeah.
Anything else, other organizations that you all are thinking of or have questions about?
The
So-
other, I'm just thinking the VA.
Hmm.
The VA for me is kind of an enigma because they're so HIPAA bound that it's like really hard for me to get any information from them. But they are still a big player in providing health services to vets. So I do have somebody who comes to the Murphy Center regularly from the VA.
Okay, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense if we can
Mhm.
find somebody that we can chat with there.
Okay.
So in thinking about some next steps, do you want to, I think we can draft up an email invitation, some language.
Okay.
Does it feel like it makes most sense to come from you, or for me to, I can send the intro and CC you and mention that I'm working with you, or what do you feel like is going to make the most sense as we reach out to these folks?
I think I can do the intro and include you on it. And then kind of let you take it from there as far as like scheduling and who and what. But I think it makes sense for me to do the initial intro.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if that's something that you feel comfortable with and you have the capacity for, I think that that sounds great.
Yeah.
And then we can figure out from our end our process for following up. Maybe you CC me, and then when I respond, I'll CC in the students who are working in that, in that group. We all can kind of think through our process together.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Any other questions or things you all are thinking about? I think my initial thought is like a Zoom. I mean, we could do just a phone call. Maybe we propose a Zoom. Do you have a thought, Taylor, on one approach that would be better than the other? Should we offer in person? What's your thought?
If it were me, I would just give the option to the provider and say we can do a phone call, we could do a Zoom, we could do in person. But that's my comfort. So I think it's all up to you and what you're wanting and feel comfortable doing. I know that most of these people on this list are vaccinated. If we're thinking of this from a COVID world. But I do know that, like, especially like for Amanda Miller as an ER nurse, like a phone call is probably going to be the most convenient for her. I think it'll just depend on the person.
Okay, and we can talk as a group about your all's comfort level as well for doing an in-person, or maybe we decide we're going to just offer phone call or a Zoom, so we can chat about that. The other piece that will become relevant also in our conversation around the interviews with folks experiencing homelessness is audio recording the interviews. I think that would be my preference, and maybe when I send the initial follow-up email, I can mention, you know, our hope would be to audio record this. And you know, we talked on Tuesday about the challenges of trying to listen and take notes, that how we show up one day impacts what we write down is important. And so having the audio transcript being a really important piece to analyze the data. So does that feel reasonable? I think, you know, specifically first with some of the community partners we're talking about, and then also when we talk about interviews with folks experiencing homelessness.
Mm-hmm. In my experience in doing these types of interviews, just asking if it's okay with people, 99% of the time they'll say yes. Especially if you frame it as, I'm just trying to make sure I capture everything that you're saying correctly and that I'm not missing anything that you've said or misinterpreting things that you're saying. I think that people are always on board with it. And same goes with like people experiencing homelessness. If you're just upfront with people at the beginning to say, this is what we're wanting to capture, do you mind if I record you? I don't think they'll have an issue, especially with like the folks that we've identified as good key informants. So yes, yeah. Anonymity, confidential, all of that.
Yeah, we've been talking a little bit about the script, you know, the initial pieces around confidentiality, around the purpose, what we're going to do with the information, whether and how they would like the information shared back with them, some of those pieces. So that's all kind of a bunch of the other things that we're thinking through with sort of the script.
Awesome.
Anything else, questions that you all have that you can think of related to the key informants with some of the community stakeholders? Okay, so let's turn our attention then to focusing now on the key informants with people who are either recently housed or currently experiencing homelessness. So Taylor, do you want to share sort of your thoughts and ideas of where you're at? I think we're still in that same realm of 10 to 12, give or take, right? I think we would like to be flexible and responsive to whatever, you know, whatever that number is that feels doable for you, feels like integral, or what's the word I'm thinking of? That it aligns with the data that we're trying to collect. I don't know why I can't think of this word that I'm, but yeah, so thinking about what is that right number, that they represent the voices that we want to make sure are heard. So
I had a list of people. So I was trying to open that up because I can't remember, but I don't know where I saved it. So that's great. Shoot. Sorry, that doesn't make sense. Well, from what I remember, I emailed several different case managers and program managers at Homeward Alliance to identify who would be good for these interviews. And I got a solid list of names and a mix of people who are recently housed, who are about to be housed, and currently experiencing homelessness. So I think the challenge with this will be scheduling. Yeah, it'll just be hard to find people for sure. So that's something to be mindful of. Are you wanting to do the interviews with guests in person?
I think
Is
that
that
would
the-
be, I think that was our first thought.
Okay,
Um,
I think
I
that
think
would be
we would-
best too. And
Okay.
I would be there.
That's what I was
Yeah.
gonna say, is we would look to you. That I think was our initial conversation, is that it would be ideal if those were in person.
Mhm. I agree. This is like always the challenge is like appointments. The folks that like, we have a couple folks who are in our non-congregate shelter project right now that have been identified as good people to talk to, and those will be easy. They have case managers who can help find them and do all of that and schedule and do that warm handoff. So that those folks I'm not worried about. I think those will be easy. But the others, I know that doing them at the Murphy Center is probably going to be the best.
Is it something where it's sort of a right place, right time, where if somebody comes in, like I'm thinking about a model where maybe we have students either like on call or over there for a little while.
Right.
I think we can be creative to think about how do we
Mhm.
facilitate this best. And we can brainstorm what that could look like.
Yeah. What are, I feel like I'm the most successful if I just show up to the Murphy Center one day and I'm like, hey, I'm doing this. Does anybody want to engage? That's when I'm the most successful. If I'm like, I'm bringing in this service on this day, make an appointment, 1 out of 10 will show up on that day at that time, or they'll be there and they'll be like, I don't want to do that today. I don't have time. So I think if we can just have that mindset going into it, that we will likely fail on a lot of the days at finding the folks that we need to find. I mean, this was a challenge for me when I was in Africa doing this kind of work. I would show up somewhere that they said they would be, and they just weren't there. So if we can be flexible with that going into it, which I know you all understand, that's important. I'm just wondering if we maybe we have a list of key informants and we make appointments and times for different days at the Murphy Center. And if they're not able to be there, then we could just find somebody else. I don't know if that's something the group is comfortable with, but we can use like Jackie at the Murphy Center to help with identifying folks day of that were there if we need to find a quick backup. I don't want to like waste your time because I know that your time is very precious as well. So yeah, what does everybody think?
I guess I'm wondering, like, if making appointments with people isn't the most successful option, like, is it an insensitive option? Like, is it harmful for us to try to make appointments with people if that's like not the best way to respect their time? Like, is it more respectful of people's time to not make appointments? If that makes sense.
I think, you know, if we're still offering incentives to do this, right? So I think that always helps as a carrot to say, like, if you show up on this day, then you have a guaranteed $20 waiting for you. I think that that really helps as far as logistics go. So I don't think it's like disrespectful to ask to make an appointment at all. Yes, time range is much better than a specific time.
Yeah, I wonder if we can kind of do, oh, go ahead, Hannah.
I was going to ask if there's any thought to like whatever questions, you know, we end up with, just to put it in a survey form and like have a QR code that just is there for the duration of our data collection. And like, if we do even get like just a few responses, great, that's at least, you know, additional insight that we might be able to use, even if it's not like a one-on-one interview situation.
And are you saying that in addition to the key informants? Or in
Yeah, I'm
replace
saying-
of?
I'm saying it like it would be the same thing. Like we would have all the questions, but it's just like an online, if they're sitting waiting for an appointment, or if they're hanging out waiting to like go somewhere else, like, and they see this and they scan it and they answer what they want to. And we at least have that like additional option. And maybe that at the end of the survey, say, hey, show it to this person and you'll still get the same incentive.
Yeah, I know one of the things we also want to talk about today is this other opportunity to provide input that isn't the formal structured key informants. So some of that, you know, I think could be related, Hannah, to your idea here. One thing I'm wondering, is there sort of a combination, Taylor, where we sort of have a plan A that's a time range and we have some scheduled, and students who are there, you know, maybe there's a time block. And so there's also the opportunity that if somebody walks in the door, right, in some ways it's a little bit more random sampling, right, that we can also get some additional perspectives that aren't just the folks that have been identified, but could give us a broader range of information. Do you have criteria that you're thinking about? Maybe not formal, but like, what are the, when you say like you've identified people who are good for this opportunity, what are some of the things that you're using to decide?
I'm mostly relying on staff who know the guests for informing me. There's certainly, there's just people who are more willing to engage than others. And then there's always like, you know, we have to be mindful of substance use and mental health conditions as well. So I think that, you know, as part of this process is identifying folks who engage in health systems, who don't engage in health systems, and finding out what their challenges are. So I think if we're getting a mix of folks who are doing both of those things, that's the best. And so honestly, I'm just relying on like Jackie, who interacts with these guests on a daily basis at the Murphy Center, to identify people who have historically been willing to engage and talk about their issues, as well as just people who tend to be kind of more of the outspoken leaders in the community as well.
Thank you for that. That's really helpful, just in thinking about, you know, sort of the decision-making process.
Yes.
One other piece I know we have talked about in class is this notion of language barriers and who may not access services. And I think we talked about having a question in our interview with community orgs around language and accessibility and whatnot, but also is there an opportunity to conduct some interviews with people whose primary language isn't English, or specifically Spanish speaking individuals?
Yes, we definitely have some people on staff who speak Spanish at the Murphy Center. So if we just prepare ahead of time, I can get that support. I can't remember, David has said before, like language that's used. And actually, this is something that we are dealing with as an organization on our diversity, equity, inclusion team, is that we don't ask our guests what their preferred language is. So that's going to start moving forward, that we make sure we're asking guests that question. So I think the majority would be Spanish as the other language being used. And we could easily get translation help from our few resource navigators and intake specialists at the Murphy Center.
Perfect.
And I've kind of just assumed that I will be present at the interviews. That's the preference from the group, right?
I think that's what you and I had talked about at an early in an earlier conversation. So yeah, I think that works great
Okay.
for us.
Okay.
What other questions or do people have? Rachel, I saw you unmute for a moment. Did you have a
Yeah,
question?
I thought
Or
someone else was
thought?
maybe talking, so I muted again. But I'm just thinking about, in class the other day, we were talking about, how to allow people to choose which questions they want to answer and make people feel like they don't have to answer all the questions or any of the questions if they don't want to. And I'm just thinking, like, some people might have specific topics they really want to talk about and specific topics they really don't. And I'm wondering, thinking about what Hannah was saying earlier about having people, like, while they're waiting, fill something out, if we could have a list of like topics, if people are waiting, like, which of these topics would you like to talk about? Which of these topics would you not like to talk about, like, beforehand? So we're not even asking questions if people aren't wanting to talk about a specific topic. And then we're able to, like, get into more detail on a topic that people do want to talk about. I don't know if there's like a way to do that, or if that would just kind of like be too complicated and get in the way.
One of the things I'm always trying to be conscious of is, like, this community always has people asking them questions and surveying them. And I don't want to overdo it for them. So I think it might complicate things. I think when it comes down to, like, scheduling these interviews, if the conversation up front is, these are the topics we're wanting to explore, are you comfortable with this? And then them knowing day of, when they're sitting in that space, to say, like, you are absolutely allowed to say that you do not want to answer a question. I think that's going to be the best way to go about that. And if it means, like, if they don't want a Homeward Alliance employee in the room while they're talking, then I will leave. Like, I think those are some things that we can make clear.
Mhm.
But this population loves to share. So I don't know that we'll have that problem, to be honest. You'll probably be like, please stop talking to me about your bodily functions.
Yeah, you might get all kinds of information you didn't know that you
Yes.
were going
Yes.
to elicit.
Yeah. It'll be fun.
What else? What other things are you all thinking about? I'm thinking, again, sort of logistically, maybe what we do. So we're going to kind of talk through signing up for some groups who wants to kind of work on what part of this next piece of the process. And so once we have the list of students who are interested in this part of it, then maybe we can think through scheduling
Mhm.
and maybe again, we do it sort of, here's the time chunk that I'll be over there, right? Maybe it's twice in there, a couple hour
Yeah.
time periods. And then we can go from there. Do you want to, I'm just thinking of the order. Let's say for folks who we are scheduling appointments, what is that process? Should we give you all of our availability? Like, let's say it's just a 2-week period, right? And we can say, here's when we have coverage there. And then you could put people into those spaces. I think we could try to be as flexible as possible to say, between 4 or 5 of us, here are all the different times somebody could be available.
Yeah, I think that will be best for me is if, and because you'll do all the like providers and organization stuff. As far as guests go, I think the easiest would be is if you provide me with all of the available time that you have, and then I'll have to coordinate that with my schedule too. And then from there, we can do the scheduling with like people who are currently housed, especially. I think we could start with them. Those would be the easy ones to schedule because we know where they'll be on any given day and we'll have contact information for them and all of that. So I think we could start by scheduling those folks first, and then we'll just keep those blocks of time for the Murphy Center guests, and just, if it's like a Wednesday from 11 to 2, then that'll be the announcement to whoever the key informant is like, show up between this time on this day.
Okay. There was another question I just had as you were talking. It's gone now.
Do we have an idea of how long yet the interviews will take, like to tell guests what to expect? I guess it depends on how much person talks, but
I think we had talked about keeping it at max an hour.
okay.
Also, just to respect the time of, if we're compensating, if we're paying you $20 or $25, then
Yeah.
we don't want to take more than an hour of your time.
Sure. Okay.
I remembered my other question was, what week, let's say we're just looking at the calendar, what
Mhm.
week or weeks should we aim for to actually hold the interviews? Maybe there's a 2-week period of time that we're going to do the interviews. Is it that last week of March and the first week of April? Does that feel too soon? Like the 29th and the 5th? Does that feel too soon? What are your thoughts?
Honestly, I think whatever works with you all. I will say that I will be out April 1st through the 6th. But I don't want like my absence to stop anybody. So if we still need to schedule things at Murphy Center for the time that I'm gone, I think that MJ would be willing to help if they have time. And then Jackie at the Murphy Center would also be willing to sit in on interviews and stuff too. So,
Okay.
is an hour too long? I think that no, it's not. They'll tell you if they're ready to go. So, we did dental appointments that were 90 minutes last week, and I think one person was just like, "Yeah, I'm ready to go," so that it ended quicker. So I think that an hour is fine. And is there a way we could have different time options to involve? Yes, there is. If we're trying to get folks at the Murphy Center, I will say that it tends to die off at around noon. Everybody pretty much leaves the property. So I think that the morning times will catch more people than the afternoons, just to throw that out there. But that being said, I think if we're scheduling things and people know to be there from a certain time, and if it is the afternoon and they know that they're getting compensated, I think people will still show up. Did I answer your question? I kind of like went off. Murphy Center is definitely where I feel most of the folks will be interviewing is comfortable. There's several offices that we can utilize. That's the other thing, that if the sooner we can get blocks of time, the better, because I'll have to block off rooms on our scheduling calendar at the Murphy Center to use for these interviews that are quiet. So employed. You are correct. I will have to see who on our list has a job, and we can be mindful of that for sure.
What else? Other considerations? I think we probably will, take this information, break up into some groups, think through some of the scheduling. We'll also at the same time kind of work on refining the script and the list of questions, which we'd love your feedback. I know you provided some feedback initially, but we'd probably like to show it to you one more time.
Yeah.
And get your thoughts on that. What else? What else are people thinking of? Oh, no, we talked about that. What's coming up for people? Anything on our list? I'm just going to go back to that. I suppose the other piece was back to that question around, is there another mode of collecting information, or do we, kind of to your point, Taylor, of this notion of not wanting to over survey, but also wanting to have a broad group of voices. And so is there something additional that we do, or do we stick with just the key informants?
One thing we could try is, like, let's say we're wildly unsuccessful in scheduling key informants. We could do a focus group, like the health district did. Yep, or a shorter interview or something. I think honestly, the focus group could be a good way to go as a backup plan. It's a different way to collect information. I think there's always like benefits from doing a focus group, because you get more dialogue and conversation and people talking about things as a collective. So I think that could be an option to say, like, we're having a focus group on this day at this time, and if you come, you get a $10 gift card for participating, or whatever it is. That's how they did it last time at the Murphy Center with that discussion group, and it was my favorite discussion group I went to. So, and that was, I think there were like eight people in the group, I think.
I'm thinking about what you said earlier with like a time frame being better than a specific time, and I wonder if there would be a way to do a focus group that happens like in a range of time and people could kind of come and go, or if that would be too disorganized.
I think we'd get too disorganized. Yeah.
I like the idea of a focus group as a backup, or even, even in addition, right? I think we could schedule some key informants and also have an additional opportunity in the form of a focus group if folks wanted to participate that way.
Mm-hmm.
Taylor, I wonder, if you feel comfortable, I'm assuming we're going to be sharing our survey questions with you, just in case an individual says, I don't understand the question. Should we have some sort of form of where either Taylor, you can, sure, let me rephrase the question for you, or Dr. Chard, does that create an issue in regards to keeping it all standardized?
Yeah, I don't think there's any issue from that perspective. A couple of things come to mind. One would be, I wonder if there's an opportunity to share the, ideally we come up with the list and then we share it for sort of pre-testing, right? Or share the questions and ask, do these questions get at, what we're trying to learn? Are these questions making sense to folks, right? And so maybe there's someone, Taylor, in your network who could serve as sort of a pre-test. We could we could compensate them as well if they're willing to review the questions to see, do they make sense? And are they getting at the information we want to get at, to do a little mini pre-test. And I also think we can have some ways of trying to reframe questions. Taylor, of course, is always willing to chime in, and we can also try our best to reword them as well.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I think an idea that just came to me is you could ask the providers what they would ask a guest or a person experiencing homelessness.
Yeah, we also talked about the other way around, is also asking guests what questions they would like to know from providers.
Yeah, do that. That'll
a little bit of it will probably be timing and which interview comes first. And we can probably ask it on both. Even knowing what questions might give us some information, right? Whether we get those questions answered, I think that could be another important piece of information to gather.
Yeah, I think that's a really important question to ask, because that's giving them the voice. So I think that's a good question to ask.
I sort of stopped taking notes. I hope somebody is taking some notes as well. I'm so bad at multitasking. I've told you all this many times before. Okay. Anything else? I can see that MJ is calling me.
They're probably like, oh no, I forgot.
Rachel, I saw what you put in the chat. I think that's a very interesting idea as well, to have some sort of something at the end of the key informant of like, what other questions would you have liked us to have asked you?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to end an interview, no matter what you're doing, to say like, to give space to say like, what else do you want me to know? What haven't I asked that you would like to share? Those are always good questions to end with. You can see she's on the phone with MJ. I'm just reading through the interview questions.
I wonder if anyone has any thoughts on this, but should the individuals who conduct the key informant interviews, should they also be the ones to conduct interviews with the professionals, or should that be a different person? And I guess my thought process is, if one of us listens to stories in regards to how an individual might feel with regards to an ER nurse, and then that same person goes and does a conversation with that ER nurse, is there a risk of us bringing some bias into that conversation?
Mhm.
I don't know, thoughts?
I think yes, there's always risk of us bringing in bias, which is why I will not be asking questions. Uh, so for me, like if I'm putting myself in your shoes, what I really liked when we did the focus groups at the health district with the community health survey is I liked going into a focus group that was all leaders in the community and asking what are the biggest health issues in Larimer County, and seeing what they all had to say from this high level perspective. And then to 2 hours later, go to the Murphy Center and say, what are the biggest health issues in Larimer County? To me, I like to hear all of the voices. So I think to me, it's kind of up to the person. If you're able to remain unbiased and ask questions that are mindful of who's in the room, I think go for it. But if you would rather make this more, I don't know what the word is, but if you want to keep them separate, then have separate groups do it. I think that's up to you all to discuss what you would prefer.
Just an update. MJ didn't have this on their calendar at all and had a totally unrelated question for me. So,
Oh, that's funny. I don't know if you heard what we were talking about. Did you?
what was the question about, like mixing groups of people?
Yeah, like what's the risk of like me interviewing a person experiencing homelessness and then having them talk about a nurse at the ER and then going and interviewing a nurse at the ER? What kind of bias do we bring into that conversation? Is it good to keep the group separate of like, this person's only interviewing guests, this person's only interviewing providers? And so I think there's risk and benefit in both. I personally like to hear both sides. So that's what I offered, but I said it was up to you all to discuss as a group how you want to toe that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, part of the process is making ourselves aware of the biases we may bring into the space and naming those. And I think that's a lot of what I'm hopeful this first part of the semester has been, is some of that self-awareness, some of that reflection, some of the identifying our biases and how they impact how we show up. And so I think raising that awareness of our biases is a helpful tool to then go into spaces and do interviews. I don't foresee any issue with interviewing both groups of people, at least not initially, but I'm happy to chat through if there are some other considerations that you all are thinking about.
I guess a part of my question was also just like Taylor was saying, if one of us, I guess since I'm the one that asked the question, if I have an interview with a key informant, and let's just say that key informant has a lot to say about the ER system and the ER nurse, and then I go into a space where there is a nurse, is there any risk? And Taylor answered this, is she, and I agree, I would definitely love to be understanding both sides of the stories, and I think that's a very interesting way to do it. But I'm just wondering if there's any risk of even specific intonation in the voice when you ask a question to that ER nurse. Like, I don't know, I might be making this up, but just like, do you treat them equally or something? And So I don't know. I guess my question was, does it make more sense for one of us would do the key informant interview, and then another person who has not done the key informant interview would go interview the nurse, and then we would come back and compare and analyze our findings?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One, that is how we're planning to do it. We'll sort of decide, do I want to interview community orgs? Do I want to interview guests? I think if we didn't go that route though, a couple of things come to mind. One is the script. That's why the script becomes really important, is so that we ask questions in a way that are consistent across everybody. The other piece that becomes important then is on the back end when we're analyzing. That's why having the audio transcription is really important, so that someone that maybe doesn't have that existing bias can also read the transcript, identify what some of the themes were. So there are things I think you can do to minimize that. Certainly if you're not aware, right? And again, now that goes back to that notion of being really self-aware. If you're not, there is a risk that you would go in and ask questions in a certain way and guide in a certain way. So yeah, I think it's all of that. I think our approach will be to sort of separate who's doing what, but I think it can work in the reverse as well, with some intentionality and some self-reflection. Kat, your question around having note takers. I think no, I think we will rely on the audio transcripts afterward. That will allow the interviewers to be really present in the conversation, not requiring a third person. Sometimes I think that impacts the dynamics in a space. If there's this person that's not really participating, but they're just sitting there writing things down or typing away. So our approach will be to have the interviewer, the interviewee, Taylor in the room when we're interviewing guests, and then having the audio transcript as the data that we go back to and analyze. What else? Other questions coming up for people? Things we haven't talked about? Okay. This has been super helpful, Taylor. I feel like I have a much clearer picture of what this looks like going forward.
Okay.
So I think some next steps when you are at a point, so I'll follow up with you with my list of key informants that we talked about, and you can, sort of compare it to your list, and then starting with some of those email introductions.
Yes.
And then on our end, we'll kind of work on signing up for who wants to take on which work. We'll look at schedules. We'll do all of those logistics things,
Okay.
while also working on the script and the draft questions.
Okay. Did you
And
say
then-
that you're gonna create like an email template language intro thing?
Yeah, do you want, yes, so I can do that. Either that's what I send as the follow-up, or that's what you include when you send your email.
I can send it in my first initial email.
Okay, so I'll draft up some of that language.
Okay.
Anything else we're all thinking about before we wrap up today?
When is your spring break?
The week of the 12th.
Of April.
Yes, they moved spring break way back.
Yeah.
So yeah, and we can talk too, right? Those of you who are around and you feel like that's actually an easier week because I don't have classes and I'd rather just get it done during that week, we could make those times available. Or you could say, no, I'm going to be away and not available during spring break. So I think we can kind of go either way there.
Yeah. Cool.
Anything else you're thinking about, Taylor? Things that we should be thinking about?
No, I'm just thinking about where my list of interviewers went. So I swear I remember doing that, but it's gone.
Yeah, I can resonate with that. I'm a little absent-minded sometimes.
Or I probably made it and then I probably deleted it for some silly reason, because that's stuff I do. So
All right, let's see. Anything else? So I'll follow up. I haven't posted anything for next week yet because I kind of wanted to see where this conversation goes in terms of next
Okay.
steps and how we want to use our time on Tuesday. So ideally by kind of midday tomorrow, I'll make sure that stuff's posted for next week so that you all know what we're doing. I might even work with Bree to create a spreadsheet of some initial signups, and then we can see where everybody's interest lies. If you're flexible, you can indicate that. We'll just start the sign up process.
I love spreadsheets.
And then we will share the spreadsheets with you.
Okay.
All right, everybody. Well, thanks for your time. Taylor, thank you so much for coming today. We so
Yeah, thank
appreciate
you.
Your help on this. And then everybody else, have a good weekend, and we'll talk soon.